Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to this Techstrong learning experience brought to you by DevOps.com. My name is Cody, and I'm the host of Techstrong Learning, and we have an exciting panel ahead. Before we get that ball rolling, we do have just a couple of housekeeping notes I'd like to go over. Today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion, perhaps you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend. The on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude this live session today. If you'd like to engage with us, there are a couple of options for you to do so, and they all take place on the right side of your screen. First option you'll see says chat. Whenever you click that, that's how you will engage with your fellow panelists, and you can also engage with us there. So I want everyone to let us know in that chat tab where they're joining us today. If you have any questions, we do want you to direct those to the Q&A tab directly to the right of that chat tab. Just helps us keep track of everything so we can address your questions whenever we deem appropriate. And of course, before we close out, we are going to be giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So be sure to stick around for the duration of our program today. So on to our topic, we'll be discussing data ops. And I'm joined by Mitch Ashley, CTO at Techstrong Group and Principal at Techstrong Research, Frank J. Olhorst, Editor at Large, and keeping this train on the tracks, we have our very own Sharon Florentine, Managing Editor here at Techstrong Group. So Mitch, Frank, and Sharon, thank you all so much for joining me today. Sharon, do you want to go ahead and get this going?
Yeah, I don't know about keeping the train on the tracks, but I will certainly keep things moving in some kind of direction. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much. I'm psyched to be here with Mitch and Frank. We're going to talk to you today about data ops. And I think we should start with maybe a couple easy ones for a change. So, what is the definition of data ops? What are we talking about when we use that term? First of all,
Well, I
Mitch, you
can,
want to?
yeah, I'll jump in, start and let Frank take it from there. When we talk about data ops, I think it's recognizing that data is not only an asset that you manage across single applications or database or data stores, data lakes, but actually it's kind of a global asset for the company. And so there are multiple disciplines that go into thinking about it as data operations or data ops, right? It's not just the data and cataloging what you have, but it's also data management practices that you know that where all your data is, what that data means, how it's being used by application, analytics, other things, how it's integrated into applications and uses and tools, and then the automation that you set up behind that, because data sort of has its own motion that it moves through at a little bit different pace in different ways than maybe code does or other things do in our applications. It has, data models and structures and things like that that you just don't roll back in a second if you happen to have something you didn't like about it. So data changes state along with its structure. So you really have to manage that across those data lakes, database platforms, and all of that. So I don't know. Thoughts, Frank? You might take that to the next step. What did I miss?
Well, you covered the basics there right off the top, but data ops kind of comes from that whole, let's throw ops behind every term that we can think of. But, what ops begins to mean is, thinking, in that agile methodology, that, reiterative way of doing things, that whole idea of, improving efficiency, making things more reliable, incorporating, controls, governance and quality, and bringing this all together via, good communications between the members of the various teams in that ops environment. So the idea here is to bring forth, folks to be able to collaborate in a reiterative fashion, to have continuous improvement on how data is available and can be used, and also to integrate a little bit further with DevSecOps, DevOps, all these other ops types elements to bring everything under this agile umbrella. And I think the biggest component of data ops is thinking about data differently as opposed to the hardware or things like that. I mean, I know we'll delve a little bit more into those elements a little bit further on, but I hate to put it this way, but it's supposed to be a way of life for those dealing with data. Uh,
Right. Yeah. It it's more of a way of managing all of the data that's streaming through your organization, if I'm hearing you both correctly.
Yeah, I think
yes.
so.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Not only managing it, and it's also leveraging that data to get more value out of it.
Right.
And managing is obviously a big component, but the ability to look at the data in different fashions and to integrate it more easily into, whether it's analysis or predictions or elements like that. Data ops becomes the fuel, the working fuel to make all of that possible. And as we delve deeper into whether it's edge computing, the web, or hosted solutions, or even compliance and cybersecurity and things like that, data ops grows in importance as well. And it really comes down to making a path to the future of how you can apply the primary principles around data into an operations environment without adding all of these silos to the mix.
Yeah, that's actually a great segue. We have a question came in asking for best practices to handle that siloed data. And the audience member says many organizations have data stored in different departments and systems, making it difficult to integrate and analyze. And it seems to me that that's exactly what data ops has evolved to address, right? Taking all of those silos and pulling everything into one integrated stream.
We could actually, put together several webinars just talking about the best practices.
Okay.
So, from that quick perspective, it all comes down to, getting that management buy-in and being able to demonstrate the value of moving away from these silos. And there's several ways to demonstrate that value. First one, most obvious one, is that it's more difficult to secure multiple silos than it is to have one, a cohesive look at the data and how data is worked with. So, you take this element of an attack surface where you have 20 different silos, which is 20 different ways to corrupt or access that data, and you move that into a single attack surface where you can put more efforts into protecting that data and also monitoring what happens with it. When you delve into performance and usage analytics and things like that, trying to figure that out across multiple silos is very difficult. Maybe generative AI might help with that one day, but as we look at things today, it's better off to have that objective view and that observability and the ability to monitor the data as a whole. And then you can, work from that whole point of a best practice of, implementing zero trust around the data, instead of having to have, sort of shims to go from, all right, this silo says this, so this application looks at these 5 different silos. We have to set up, 5 different paths. We have to look at different aspects of security. It becomes very complicated, and it allows, large holes to be opened up when it comes into protecting your data. Anyway, that's my spiel on it.
Okay.
Oftentimes we think about data silos going back to even legacy applications, right? Apps that were built, a database that was built around an app, or vice versa. And oftentimes that's where the accessibility to that data comes from. That can happen in modern day applications too, right? I have got my own data silo living in some cloud service provider nobody else knows about. More or less how to access and use. There's this concept of sort of the corollary, or another way to think about silos is dark data. not meaning dark web data, but dark data that people don't know about, right? Don't know that it's there. It's not being used. It's not being analyzed. It's not being leveraged. It's not providing any value other than what its original intent was for the apps or people that use that. So I think that's one of the key strategies around a data ops approach is, first of all, identifying, of course, what all data that you have, where it's located, what it's being used by, and try to catalog in that some form or fashion. The next is understanding how pipelines might be constructed for automation between data sources and uses of those data. And that's a lot of the ops part of this, right? Not all of it, but it's a good part of it around optimization and automation. And also the other is transformation. You overuse that word, but data transformation, right? Is a customer in one system might not be the same data format, structure, meaning as it is in a half dozen other systems. So a lot of the technology that's part of the platform, and maybe multiple, is helping you manage those transformations. So that you're putting into a data lake, you're putting it into another database, you're accessing it through a set of APIs for other purposes. The right presentation and the meaning of that data is leveraged in the way it should. Otherwise, you're making bad decisions, not only about bad quality of data, but potentially the wrong understanding what the data means.
Yeah. Here's a really good question from the audience as well. How do you relate DataOps with DevOps?
Ooh, I'll jump at that one, Frank. I
Okay.
can't help
Right.
it. So
That's a tempting one, huh?
it
Okay.
is. I jumped right on that hook. Didn't even have to have a
Awesome.
worm on that one. I'm happy to jump on it. It's one thing I want to say about it. It's been interesting kind of going through the experience with DevOps is, for a long time, I kind of thought, well, where's data in this picture? We're talking a lot about software and security with DevSecOps and maybe AI ops. And what about data and databases? Hey, welcome, Mike Vizard. Good to have him join us. And it was kind of, I don't know if I'd say it's left out. It was just unclear where data fit into this whole automated workflow pipelines, software delivery, continuous delivery. How does that fit in? And I think one of the reasons why is data has a bit of a stickier state to it. I mentioned this earlier of when you have data models, representations of data and structures of that, you just don't willy-nilly make changes to that. I mean, data has to transform and migrate with those changes in designs and formats and data models and things like that. So it doesn't just easily follow with, well, let's add this new code and we'll change the structure of the database and move on and poof, everything uses it. Now you might isolate a data access and some of those things to help with that, but you don't easily roll back from those kind of changes. So I think that's where data ops really comes into play in its own, in that now you understand the workflow, the streams of data, and how that fits into your development pipeline, but also deployment pipeline. So you can understand, are we prepared to deliver this code that requires some structural change? Or are we doing this in a way that maybe is isolating and managing some of that structural change? So it's the way of fitting it in as part of DevOps flow. It doesn't have to be part of DevOps, but it certainly, I think, is essential to do it adequately.
Yeah, I can give the Reader's Digest version of an answer to that question where, we just, talk about, DevOps, how it focuses on software development and deployment. And then when we talk about data ops, we're talking about data pipelines and the quality of the data and the processes around that. But, as, Mitch explained, there is a comprehensive element where both these have to work together to get the most value out of everything. But, a lot of the principles behind the scenes, which we go back to talking about, the Agile Manifesto is kind of the same between, data ops and DevOps. They're very, very related from that point of view. But when you comes down to splitting hairs, one is about the software, the other is about the data, and ultimately the goal is to make them work together in a cohesive, adaptable way.
So you brought observability into the conversation. So I want to go there for a second because, part of observability is bringing in metrics, logs, traces. So that necessarily means you've got a ton of data flowing in about your applications, the systems, everything that underpins that. How does DataOps fit into that? And how does it help deal with some of the data challenges that observability introduces?
That ends
Uh-oh.
a good,
I
good,
got
good
this.
question. It comes down to, dealing with this incredible volume of data. And I'm not talking about, data as in what you have out in your data lake or data warehouse, but the amount of data that's generated by, these things that allow us to observe what's going on. So, one of the challenges when it comes to comprehensive monitoring is picking the proper tools that show you what's important. And again, this is where, perhaps, some of these AI elements can come in to help, by being able to, delve into that data to show you what's important. The other thing that's important to really think about is, establishing your metrics and your KPIs. You have to know what's normal to know what's not normal is, the simplest way to explain that. And then you have to be able to, put that up on a dashboard so that you're able to visualize it. And then you need to be able to report on it so that you can spot trends. So, we're getting into the realm of analytics here, but we also have to be able to see via these dashboards and these, graphic representations of what's going on when there's something that falls out of norms or when there's some type of an alert or something critical is happening. So you have to make sure that, whatever lives out in your data lake or your data warehouse has the hooks in it that make it observable. And a lot of that comes down to the tools that you use. And, those tools should integrate with, your data flow processes and data access processes and the policies around that to be able to give you this information, ultimately with the goal of being able to do continuous improvement on your processes, your data, and be able to quickly, iterate new ways of working with the data. I mean, it's a giant ball of wax when it comes down to it, but it all starts with observability, being able to see what's happening in your data pipelines, being able to interpret that into something meaningful, and to be able to filter out all the noise.
Mitch, I think the giant ball of wax is broken. And
split up into several pieces, is it?
and the issue that I'm having is like, okay, so the average developer goes to great lengths to go find something like a MongoDB that they can download themselves, so they don't have to talk to a database administrator, and they can go build a thing until that thing scales, and then they can't cope with all the data that they got to manage, and they go looking for somebody back in the data side to help them manage this whole thing. So is there some way that we can short circuit that a little bit so the developer doesn't feel like they need to end run those people in the first place? And is there a conversation that needs to be had between the developer teams and the data teams about, maybe, just maybe we're on the same team, and maybe we should figure out how to do this in a way that allows everybody to do their jobs and not feel like the other guy is the enemy?
I feel an article coming on here that I want to write, the big ball of wax and what we do about it. No, it's serious, actually. Well, so I think some of this comes from kind of heritage, right? The days of, the gurus on high that we had to go to the DBAs to get a SQL statement written for us or get access to God knows anything, right? Thankfully, I hope those days are gone. But the other side of it you bring up is I need blah, so I'm going to go get it and I'll work it. And then once it gets a little unwieldy and too much I want to deal with, I'll toss it over the wall to who owns a thing like that, the data people. I think that's going to happen no matter what. We're always going to have some degree of that. Some organizations control it more than others. To me, I think one of the things that when I was running IT at a larger organizations, I always told my team, now things are going to happen all over the organization, but people always come to us for one of three things at least: security, data, and integration into applications. So when they need data, we have to be able to say, here it is, and here's how you get to it. But you got to think like a developer. You can't say it's in this data lake warehousey thingy, and you got to use some tool you've never heard of. No, here you go. Here's the libraries. Here's the structure. Here's the information you need to go query it. And here's some sample code. Here's an SDK, whatever you might need to do that. I think the things you can do to reduce the friction. So a developer says, do we have a thingy like that? Do we have a data thing that looks like this, that has information about customer or product or whatever it might be? Or I need some analytics capabilities that I can leverage from my Python library and just connect to your database. Where is it? Okay, great. So the easier that data people make it for developers to use it, the less likely they'll go replicate it and create duplicates, and then we got to manage it later. That's my answer. Is that easy to do? No, but I actually don't think it's that hard to do, especially as you start to get some successes behind it. So I'll run this through ChatGPT and I'll post the article right after this.
There you go. All right. but Frank, to follow up on Mitch's point, right? So you get all that done and it's a wonderful world, and suddenly we got kumbaya, and then somebody tells you the data is crap, as they say in Scotland. And so,
crap in Scotland.
Aye.
So why is it that the data so often is crap, and none of it kind of lines up with what people were expecting? And you would think it's 2023 and we would have our collective data act together enough to prevent this from happening. But it seems like time and time again, everybody calls up and says the same thing. It's like, I built the app, I got the pipeline, and then it turned out the data was a mess.
Yeah, it happens all too frequently. And, a lot of that comes down to how, what type of data you're trying to capture and how you're trying to store that to make it available. And, this used to be one of those issues that we used to look at with, big data analytics. How do you filter the crap out of the data to get something of value to work with? And, it still remains a giant challenge. A lot of it comes down to how perhaps some of the applications are developed to meet a particular need, and no one is thinking outside of the box at that point in time, that maybe we should be gathering this additional information, whether it's either transactional information or associated information with a transaction, to be able to look at it in the future. I think a lot of that comes from the apparent rush to create an application to service, a client or customer needs or something like that, and to get it out there to quickly, address that problem, and then not revisiting it to see what, other data could be useful. So, I wouldn't blame the platform for creating the crap. I would blame the human beings for being the masters of crap at this point in time.
Well, and so someone made a comment in the chat here that, all of this is incredibly expensive.
Yes.
Right. And so what are you paying for then? You're paying for a bunch of crap,
That's a scary proposition, but you have to look at it, what is the value of the data? What is the value of what you're getting out of it? And, versus the cost, it's just like any other ROI calculation, except for when you start talking, from that IT perspective and that, data perspective and that imagine what we can do perspective, it becomes a little bit harder to quantify. So, you have to look at it from a very basic point of view, is that you can't have a bunch of data that's not managed in any way, shape, or form, because that opens up all sorts of, whether it's security issues or, resiliency issues, or even auditing issues down the line. You have to have some sort of management in place to know what's going on with the data. Mm-hmm. And you have to have the tools there to be able to work with that data. I mean, it becomes a real, basic need. The point becomes is how far do you go with that, and how do you justify that value?
Mhm. So if that's the case, Mitch, can these so-called data engineers that are the hottest jobs in all of IT these days save us from ourselves? Because to Frank's point, right, the poor IT person has no idea that the data is crap either, because they didn't enter the data, and as far as they know, it was okay because somebody in the business entered it. But then, how is the IT person going to know that the data is crap in the first place? And now we have these data engineers who are skilled, no doubt, but the question is are they just automating crap?
Or are they being asked to address the quality issue? Right. That's a whole
Mhm.
other question.
Right.
Well, so two answers to that. One is kind of small answer, though I know it's a lot of work, is a part of this is governance. I only bring it up in this, not that I'm a big policy restrictions kind of thing, but governance falls, part of it is just how much you're keeping, right? Most people keep data because they don't know. They're the developer. Should I keep this? I don't want to get fired for being the person that tossed it, deleted it. So you end up with it's not just garbage in, it's garbage in and garbage dumps out. It just builds and builds and builds. That's part of the problem, is if we don't apply at least some kind of management policies to how long we keep it, what we keep it for, and how do we know when to get rid of it. So that's the small answer to your question about data engineers. My view is data engineers are being asked to prepare data for a specific use, right? Not to solve a large, massive data problem for the organization. Maybe they do, but you hear a lot of it around automation, data models, AI systems, machine learning. Those are it's sort of the next level of analytics. It's not just doing analytics on the data, but it's preparing data for use in specific specialized applications or technologies like machine learning. So I don't know that that's the solution to the problem. Maybe there's data engineers, and there's a pact of them that have signed an agreement to save the planet from data that's crap. I haven't heard of it yet. but you heard it here. If it starts here, that's where the idea came from.
Well, crap can sometimes be good fertilizer. So you got to think of it that way. What can you grow out of the crap?
It is. Well, hopefully.
ACD Consortium, Anti-Crap Data Consortium, launched here today.
I warned you at the beginning, folks. Couldn't promise to keep the train on the rails. So
you've been doing great up until that point. Sorry, I don't know anybody could have stopped that.
Right. So I will say though, and I live a little bit in this space, but there's terminology that the data guys throw around that just drives everybody, I think, around the bend a little bit. But as I understand it, like, all right, let's assume that the data is going up in the cloud, and we used to have a data warehouse, and then we had a cloud data warehouse. But that wasn't good enough because apparently that was too narrowly focused, maybe, or whatever. So we invented the data lake. And the data lake just became a data swamp because, well, they had too much data in it and it didn't have any way to structure it. So now we have data lake houses, which is some attempt to kind of hybridize the two and create something that maybe has the middle ground for both. But, Frank, what's your sense? Are we just kind of out marketing ourselves here a little bit too much? And maybe we ought to take a giant step back and just say, hey, there's this repository in the cloud and it's full of data, and away we go.
I think it would be much simpler to talk about it that way, especially when it comes to presenting it to those who sign the checks to live in that data lake house. But they are, when you look at it below the surface, a data lake house, and a data warehouse are three different types of storage. And what's really different about them is that the architecture behind it. So, a data lake is kind of this generic term for where you have this large volume of raw, unprocessed data. It just kind of floats around in that lake, and it's all in its native format. And then you got to go fishing in that lake. And, people used to use things like, Hadoop and or cloud-based solutions to do that fishing. A data lake house kind of addresses that data where it's a little more structured. So, that data lake house can deal with, both unstructured and structured data, and it can incorporate things because it's not just this big pile of data. It can kind of take into account some of those issues around governance. And then, a data warehouse is more about structure and efficiency. So, can you combine all these into one thing? I think that is the dream of many of these cloud data service providers. But each has its uniqueness about it. But we do need to get to a point of view where we do have that raw data available, and we also have kind of that schema around that data, so it's no longer raw. And then we also have to have that governance to make sure that data, it meets, to keep the crap out of the lake. Other than what the fish leave behind.
Speaking of keeping the crap out of the lake, as I recall back in the day, you wrote a couple of books here and there about Hadoop and data, big data. So whatever happened to that? I mean, is that now the Gowanus Canal of data swamps, or what's the deal?
Maybe it's more like the Love Canal. What happened is, as things moved into the cloud and services became more applicable and easier to use, people didn't have to stand up their own Hadoop clusters anymore. They just shoved the data off to a cloud service provider. That kind of changed the whole concept of how one worked with data from doing big data analytics, because now you've got your data stored in something different than a Hadoop cluster that you no longer have to manually write these queries against, because you've got all these tools kind of applied to it. Now, there are those folks out there that want to keep their data isolated for whether it's security or other purposes, and a Hadoop cluster still fits into the mix, because then you can do that, air gapped from the web. But, as time goes on and security gets better, you might not need to do that anymore. So, like with anything else, this has been a transformation where this has kind of shifted to cloud services.
All right. I will say there is something I am excited about. So let's jump to a positive note here. But something cool is starting to happen, right? So for the last 20 years, we spent loading all this data we could find up into the cloud because we thought we were lifting and shifting a data warehouse into the cloud. However, it seems to me we're getting better at processing and analyzing data at the point where it is created and consumed. And so that's more of the data management moving out to the edge. Mm-hmm. And is that kind of going to drive this whole data ops requirement? Because we are doing more than just quite literally lifting petabytes of data and throwing it up in the cloud. We are actually trying to operationalize and manage this stuff. So Mitch, is there hope for us in this context as, maybe we move away from this batch processing mindset to something that feels a little more event-driven, cloud-native, microservices, buzzword of the month kind of application?
You forgot serverless, but yes.
Yes.
Well, so more than just kind of theoretical, is that something people are thinking about it? There are applications, and kind of IoT sort of started it, I guess. But things, you're talking about devices like cars, our electric vehicles, basically being a platform for software, are collecting massive amounts of telemetry and needing to upload and process that, on a daily, nightly, maybe somewhat while you're driving, but certainly while you're plugged in at home. So all of a sudden the edge of the network, just as one application, right? Suddenly you're needing a lot of data storage capacity. That are you going to ship all of that centrally to process it, or you're better off pushing it, leaving it on the edge and using edge computing, whether it's in the home, in the pedestal, up the stream, in some kind of virtualized part of the network, to be able to do that. So I think we'll continue to see more and more of those kinds of applications. Smart homes are another good example. The more services we get that are distributed, that don't require going back to a central database and some massive compute, I think all the better. And we've got architectures, we've got software like serverless, I mentioned, just one, Lambda, things like that, to be able to do it. I do think, though, there's there's still a big role for, I grew up in the days of data warehouses where you put all your data on a Teradata, and then it spends weeks answering one question, kind of back to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? You wait forever for the answer to come out, and it's 42, and you forgot what the question was. But and then what was, I think, very cool, and what I still like about whether it's Hadoop or Snowflake or other structured and unstructured data warehouses is it gets you out of trying to unify the data model across all these applications and saying, okay, when you put it all together, because I went through these exercises, it's a tilting a windmill process. There is no one definition for all of it, and getting it all to match the same structure definition, meaning whatever, is using transformation tools to be able to then leverage unstructured and data with different or slightly different formats and meaning. I think there's still a huge role for that. Now, does it all need to go to one big distributed data lake? I don't think we need it all in one place. I think we can create application or domain specific or things like that, have those things living closer at the edge too.
Yeah, it seems to me the whole thing is going to get a lot more federated and will require more skills to manage.
Yeah.
But every day goes by, somebody comes along and says, here's my great new AI thing. So how automated can all this get? Frank, what do you think? Is, DataOps engineering a job for the future? Or is this something, we created because we don't have the tools, but maybe the machines will manage the machines and we don't have to sweat this detail so much?
Well, the machines are, at least at this point in time, are always going to need someone to train them, or to write the code around machine learning, to feed the data in, to provide the examples of what is an acceptable output. But it brings up another point where you have these AI engines that can provide answers, and then the question becomes, how do you start integrating that into your data in such a way that you're going to get the types of answers that have value? I mean, it's one thing to look at the data and pull out some sort of related element, but if that means nothing to you, well, what was the point when it comes down to it? So you're going to have humans involved to either look at the exceptions that come out, and to further ask the question of, why did this relationship between these data elements even appear? Is it something wrong with the AI, or is it something new that we should be looking into? The AIs aren't sophisticated enough to make those emotional driven decisions about what to do. So I think a lot of it really comes down to having a human that can understand relationships a lot better and apply the context to it other than what a machine does. And we've also kind of we're moving into this realm where we've got containerization and, like you mentioned before, microservices and all these different things that are going to have to kind of be able to talk to each other in a fashion to deliver value if you're going to start throwing AI at it. And, Chat GPT is, one of those, perfect examples. Let's throw a ton of data at it. Let's train it. Let's give it examples on, how to properly answer it, and let's do continuous improvement on the model. And it kind of mirrors what DataOps is all about from a human perspective. So the question is, how good will AI become at doing what a human can do, especially one that is very familiar with data relationships and uncovering that value and aligning that with the goals of a business.
If you think about it, we've kind of been doing things leading up to this, Frank and Mike and Sharon. If you think about what search engines have been doing now for a couple decades, right, of curating not just the data but the algorithms that work with everything that it encounters, right, good, bad, and ugly. And then also you think about the mapping technology that we have, right? Today, we don't think twice about if I get directions out of whichever my favorite map is, the popular one, it's probably going to be pretty close to getting me there. Maybe not always my favorite path, but it's going to get me there. Sort of let's take that several steps forward, and that's where we are with AI, which is, all of the effort to go from GPT 3.5 to 4.0 is really about curing the data, labelizing the data so that well, that's part of it, is structuring it so that it can be processed by the AI engine, machine learning algorithms. But the other is kind of the governance of, well, what goes in there, right? I mean, and this is a big question about AI, because there have been instances where bad data or inaccurate data will go into some system, recommendation engine, analytics, AI, and then all of a sudden it will spit out an answer that says, this is a neighborhood where the values of homes are overpriced. Well, there happened to be an error in the data that went into that, or the algorithm. But now that's been baked into real estate brokers' information, articles they've written about that part of the country. People's now have it in their mind that that's how it is, when in fact that was all based on bad data. Translate that into, do I want an AI engine doing heart surgery on me that doesn't have good data put into it? Well, we probably want some pretty extremely accurate, maybe a little bit less risky data than maybe other applications. So the whole curation of what is good data, meaning not just quality data, but the right data we want AI to be basing its analytics on, is, I think, a huge still field for us to get a hell of a lot better at it than we are now.
So it all comes back down to the crap.
Yeah. I'm not entirely sure I agree with you, because, I have to weigh that against the crap data that went into the human surgeon in the first place. So, maybe, the machine might still have an edge here. So I don't know.
You need to get a new surgeon, Mike.
But so here's the thing I am hopeful about. So this is an opinion, but I don't think there's any organization in the last 25, 30 years that would give it a good housekeeping seal of approval for the way they manage data. I think everybody kind of sucks at this. And it's the dirty little secret of IT, right? And it's been floating around for years, and we all kind of ignore it, except the business unit knows it, because the business unit almost never trusts the data, and they're always dubious of the data analytics that shows up, because they know how the data was created in the first place. So
they get like, 3 answers to the same question that aren't the same.
You're giving me an analysis on the data that I entered that I know is crap. So they're like, they're not that stupid. They go, this is kind of crazy. But as we start to appreciate what AI can do and the need for the data to have higher quality, I think maybe we will get to a point where we are more careful with how the data is created and what we do with these applications, because we all realize now that there is this downstream effect. There are people emerging who are data engineers and data ops who might show up at somebody's desk one day and say, you screwed up this entire AI model because, you couldn't be bothered to enter this data correctly. And maybe we will have a better conversation about this whole thing. So I don't know. I'm hopeful. But, Mitch, you've been doing this a long time. Am I just whistling past the proverbial AI graveyard?
I'm hopeful, because everything I create, I send to Sharon, and it gets turned into something good. It starts as just crap, and then people, Sharon, turn it into something amazing. I really mean that sincerely. I do rely heavily on people, but that's a good analogy, right? Yeah, I'm supposed to know what I'm talking about in theory anyway, but communicating or putting it into a form that can be consumed, right? So I think that's a big part of the human element of this. And I agree with you. I mean, there is no like who won the Deming Award for data quality. If there ever was one, I don't remember who it was, but I don't think. Oh, you got one. Who was it?
There's no. I'm thinking that's a good idea.
Oh, okay. next blog article.
All right. And then, and can I rant on something else that's related to this, since I'm already kind of teeing off on a lot of things today?
Sure.
Data is the new oil. I'm like, are you kidding me, for crying out loud? We can't even process the data. So how can it be oil? We can't turn it into anything useful, because we have, a bunch of narrow-ranged analytics apps that somebody will look at me and tell me, with great passion and insight, some indicator that of something that actually happened like 6 months ago, so I can't act on it. So, like, it's nice for you to send me this analysis, but it's not really meaningful from a business executive's perspective. So can we get to this dream of, true data-driven decision-making? Because most of it seems to be narrowly limited to a set of data that we don't always trust.
Well, data is the new oil is a good way to kind of try and put it. I would say data is the new crude oil. It's slippery and toxic. So, we have to get to that point of being able to refine it. And, that's where a lot of things like governance and AI and all of these other tools really come into the mix. But, you have to be collecting data that has value in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And you have to be able to distinguish between, what's a leading indicator of something that's meaningful and what's just a glorified graph database that somebody put together based on spreadsheet data that doesn't really tell me anything that I can act on. Right?
Yeah, I mean, how much of the collection is kind of that Jurassic Park principle, right? Like everybody looked around and said, "Oh my God, we have the technology. We can collect all of this data. Give it to me, give it to me." But they never stopped to ask, like, should we be collecting all this? And now that we have it, what the hell do we do with it? And so then they're, oh, well, there's got to be something valuable in there. There's got to be. Think of all the great value that we can extract from that without figuring out how to pull it out first. So
I'll let Mitch go off on that governance angle.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
So the take I was gonna go after this is, I think we're asking the wrong question. There is no nirvana of high quality data and with all the right context and it's accurate and we're going to be able to use it. We don't live in a world like that with anything else. Why would data be any different? So what we do in place of that, right, is we attached quality, meaning, value based on the provenance of the data. Well, this came from LexisNexis. Do I know how they did it? Heck no, I have no idea how they did it. But because of who they are, who produced it, etc. Now, if it's some Yahoo down the street I've never heard of, I might take it with a grain of salt. And I'm going to compare it to other sources. So I think in the end, this is kind of where it goes to when the robots are in control, how much trouble are we in? But we still have to put our own qualitative, assessment judgment on the source, the how current it is. Do we trust what that they're doing a good job of, whether it's our folks or somebody external? It's still all going to come to that, no matter how good a work we do to get rid of the bad data and keep the good. Just my opinion. I think anything else is kind of I don't think is going to happen.
So what is your sense, Mitch, and we'll start with you, about does DevOps and DataOps need to merge, or can they sit side by side? I mean, in some ways, no offense to our DataOps friends, but basically they seem to have had some sort of case of DevOps envy, and they just cribbed the whole best practices thing and inserted, data for every word. Every time we had code, they added data and called it a manifesto, right? I mean, God bless, but that's basically what happened. So does that mean that DevOps and DataOps should just merge, and maybe we'll have like Dev DataOps, or, and then of course everybody wants to throw in their buzzword of the day. So then we got like Dev DataSecOps, and then we got like is this all just going to come together in some sort of cohesive way anyway?
So my practical answer is, I think DataOps is where DevSecOps was 3 years ago or more, right? It's taking the principles of DevOps and applying it to a lot of disciplines, like we have FinOps and everything else. What's still missing, though, is at least I don't see it as, it's not well integrated or at all into a DevOps workflow pipeline today. Does it need to be? Absolutely. Yeah. And it doesn't mean everything. All parts of what we mean by DataOps today has to be built into the DevOps part of the workflow, the overall of it. But I don't see people taking cognitive steps to say, okay, this is where the DataOps part of DevOps happen in these elements of our workflow pipeline. Starting to, but I think we got a ways to go, quite a ways to go. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and my analogy to the whole thing is, there's these beautiful DevOps pipelines, and then there's these beautiful DataOps pipelines. But between those two pipelines is a bunch of people with buckets handing water back and forth to fill them both up.
With some oil spills.
Crude oil spills.
Yeah. Yeah, not good.
Mhm. Frank, what's your best advice to folks on this whole thing? I mean, we're joking around a lot, but at the end of the day, something has to happen here. People do things and they have value, and a lot of companies have addressed some of these issues. Particularly a lot of the startups out there that do a lot of interesting work, but it seems like maybe the enterprise is a little bit behind the curve, or what's your thought here?
Well, the very first thing, folks need to do is figure out what data you have. Where is your data? Do an inventory of your data. Why are you collecting that data? Where does that data go? Where does that data live? What happens if you archive that data? You kind of have to have that, holistic view about what data is, which, to go back to that crude oil comparison, you got to know where those barrels of oil are before you can do anything with them. That's the first thing, is figure out where your data is, what's creating it, where it's going, and how you can get at it. Then the second thing, of course, is being able to, clean the data, or, at least wrap governance around it, so that, the data that you're getting is useful at this point in time. Now, that's going to take, a bit of work, because, in the past, we've discarded things that that might have importance at a later date. So now we get into the fact of trying to figure out, how do we put some metadata around the data to be able to identify, that value. And then, of course, we have to look at how we integrate data, how we work with it with applications, how we look at it down the road, and what type of questions we should be asking of the data. We shouldn't let the data tell us what questions to ask. We should know what questions to ask of the data to go deeper into it. And of course, you've got to be very concerned with quality. You have to make sure that, that there's quality in the data, and you have to be able to, measure that quality to understand that value of that data. You might get a lot of data from some, some automated devices out there, like, street lights. All right, it's great that we got all this data that the light was red, the light was green, but it doesn't matter if you don't have something to, compare it against, other than saying, hey, the light was red 37 times today. Now, if you know how much traffic is moving, and, if there were any accidents, or if the light was green on both sides, then there's value to it. And it's that thing of thinking about, data as something that you can mine into to determine value.
All right, Mitch, what's your advice to folks? What would you kind of live this every day, and I know we have these conversations about leading indicators versus reports, but what's your sense of how do we turn this into something that the business is going to go, yeah, let's get behind that, because there's a lot of cynicism in the world out there.
There is. I think my advice would be, mainly because I've made this mistake myself, is don't go down the tilting at windmills path, right? Trying to unify things, trying to get it all on one platform, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. It's a moving target, as Frank described it, or one of you did. And it's a hell of a lot of work for not a lot of a great outcome. I think the focus should be on getting visibility and use of the data, right? And helping people discern how to get the best, what data we should use and get the best value out of it. So just to make a simple example, we have this this thing called Greg on our team, and Greg's the thing everybody goes to. He's a person who everybody goes to and says, I need data for blah. And he's a specialist at helping with, well, here's where we have that data. Here's how we can get it in a way you can use it, and I'll produce it for you this way. Or we go to Kim and say, here, Kim, help us with this. And that person helps us shape that. And then, or they work together and make it happen. And on a micro scale, that's, I think, what all of us are looking for, is how do we get it out of the systems, the stores, the what locations, the whatever it is, and how do we help the people who need information are asking for questions, the Mike Vazards of the world, the Sharon Florentines of the world, the Mitch Ashleys of the world, and help them get that data in as useful of a form as possible, and then stop doing it when it's not useful anymore. That's my advice.
I think we should teach people how to ask questions. And I think that it is easy to go to some poor IT person and say, hey, can you help me prove X, Y, and Z? But the fact that you asked the question in the way that you asked it is inherently biased because you're looking for data to support some supposition. And, the IT person is just going to look at you and salute and say, sure, I'll go find that data and hand it back to you. And, they're not in the business of vetting whether or not it was a valid query in the first place. I mean, some are, but by and large, most aren't. And I think part of the issue is, we keep showing up with these, assumptions built into questions, and we don't necessarily think that through or educate folks about how to ask those questions in a way that doesn't result in something, because everybody has the same natural bias. I think the first question is, prove to me or show to me that this data can confirm something I already know.
That was a great confession, Mike. We appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, it comes down to, people want to validate their assumptions, and that's kind of their natural thing to try and do. And validating your assumptions doesn't have much value beyond what it means to you. So it's kind of, you have to ask the right questions of the data. And this goes back to, the big data, batch processing analytics types of things, that you have to know what to ask of the data, where instead of saying, show me that I'm the greatest salesman that there is, the question should be, something along the lines, who are the top salespeople and what are the numbers associated with their sales are?
Well, an updated version of this saying is, it's lies, damn lies, and spreadsheets, right? You can make them say anything you want, which is your point, Mike. I mean, there is asking a question and with the whatever assumptions you have behind it. We all do it. I was teasing you about confession. Trust me, I've done it thousands of times. But there's also then say, okay, well, let's look at the data and see what it says. And yeah, I might interpret it with that lens on, but what are other ways of understanding what this is saying to us? And does that inform us more than just what my assumption was? Not easy to do, but the right thing to do.
Hey, any lawyer will tell you that asking leading questions is a skill. So, it's the same thing.
Paid a lot of money to do that.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Awesome. Cody, I think we are just about ready to wrap up here for the day.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that handoff, Sharon, and Frank, Mitch, Mike, glad we got you on. But everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciated this conversation, and I'm sure our audience did as well.
Thanks for hosting, Cody.
Of course. So I'd like to remind our audience that our session today was recorded. You will be receiving an email with a link to access the recording on demand. You can also find it living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars, and be sure to look in the on-demand section. It will be there waiting for you in just a few hours. So the 4 winners of our $25 Amazon gift card drawing are Cyrus S., John L., Chris J., and Warwick T. So to our 4 winners, congratulations. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim your gift card. It should arrive in about 48 hours. But if you don't happen to see that email, check your spam folder just in case. I'd like to thank our panelists for being here, and to our audience, thank you for being here as well with us for this past hour. We really appreciate your time, and we want to hear your feedback. So as soon as we close out, there will be a survey that pops up. Let us know what you thought about this conversation, or if you have suggestions for upcoming topics, let us know there. We would love to hear your input. Regardless, we hope to see everyone at a future Techstrong learning experience. Have a great rest of the day. And Frank, Mitch, Mike, Sharon, thank you.
Make the data better. Thank you.